Okay, so the next order of business is we will be doing the retirement board interviews. I see both candidates are here. Last time we asked the other candidate to step out of the room while the first candidate was being interviewed, so I'd like to continue that today. And this is a board discussion, and there is really no public input during that time, so I would appreciate if you would not hold your questions. If you want to submit any concerns or questions, certainly submit them in writing, but not tonight. You can verbalize them tonight. So why don't we do one at a time? Gary, could you step out? Thank you.
Can I be able to grab some water?
Absolutely.
Sure.
This is a dry meeting, so
You might find out that's not water.
yeah, that's right. Now you're gonna know why we can put up with all this. Even vodka.
I think that door has to remain open.
Yeah, if we could open
Yeah,
the
it
door,
does.
please.
Yeah, it does.
TV show.
TV show. Yeah. No, it's only executive session. So good evening. We are conducting, as you know, our retirement board interviews. That we have one opening. I apologize for all of the ups and downs we've had with weather and other difficulties, but we are here tonight, and we're going to get this process finalized so we can move on. Last time we did these, we asked the candidate to tell us a little bit about themselves first, and then a little bit why they would like to do this, and your availability and your dedication to the town, and all of those kinds of things, and then we'll have questions from the board. Please.
Okay, so if I remember at this point, so who am I? So I'm a 25-year resident of Andover.
For the record, tell us your name and all that,
Yep,
so
I
we
was
can go
gonna
into
get
the
to
record, yep. Yep.
So it's, my name is Wilhelm Kremer, Will for short. That's probably the easiest way to go about it. So I've been in Andover for 25 years. We moved to Andover because we had a number of friends, and they told us how good the schools were and how well the town was run. And we sort of had missed our chance when 11 years or 12 years prior, when we looked for housing, it wound up in another town, basically because of a high interest rate. But in any case, so we have two kids, both of them graduated from Andover High. You're probably too polite to ask, but why do I have a Germanic name? Because I was born in Austria. I was 8 when my family moved to Ohio. So if I have a little bit of a Midwest accent, that's probably why.
We're very inclusive here in town.
No problem. So anyhow, then moved to the Boston area to go to school, where I got a BS in economics from MIT, and then later moved to Sweden, where I got a PhD in math from the University of Lund. So I've had a 30-year career at Bell Labs, and started in what was then the old Bell system. And through the years, it became AT&T and Lucent and Alcatel-Lucent, and eventually got bought by Nokia. So I did leave for a while for a startup during the bubble years, trying to get rich. I didn't, but it was a good try. It was a pretty interesting experience. So in terms of what I've done, I've been a math instructor at the university and Institute of Technology level. At Bell Labs, I've been a systems engineer, a process engineer, a technical marketer. I've also had roles as a CTO and a vice president. I do have, so I kind of sent you the long form resume. Believe it or not, there's a short form, but I thought I'd just send the long form. So I do have patents. I've had some publications. There's some standards, some technical honors, and if I were sitting in the audience, I'd probably go, "Yeah, so what? What's that got to do with the retirement board?" Because after all, with the technical stuff, I'm not advising you as to whether to go with Comcast or with Pios. or which service provider, wireless service provider you want to use. And what I have had experience with is working in small groups to solve difficult problems and go after some pretty big goals. And just a couple of examples. So one is in terms of development. So especially like if you're in a product management, systems engineering kind of role, you've got to work with sales, you've got to work with marketing, you got to work with product management, you got to work with requirements writers, you have to work with hardware and software development. And everybody fundamentally has the same goal, which is to have a successful product and make lots of money. But people have competing interests for obvious reasons. So sales, they basically just want to look, 1 year out, be able to tell the customer whatever they want to tell them, and, sign contracts. As you go down into the sort of the bowels of the development, as you're working with hardware and with software, and you're negotiating in terms of what you can get and when you can get it and what you can't get, and so on. The role has been you kind of push. So you ask a lot of questions. You don't know the answer yourself. I'm sure typically you don't. But you just keep pushing, and you kind of find the soft spots, and you go back and forth, and you finally kind of figure out what can be done, what can't be done, and you try to come to a conclusion where you do have a rollout and you do have a product. So that's one example of just working with teams and the kinds of things you have to go through. When you're in standards, it's very, very different. So it depends a little bit whether it was domestic standards or whether it was international standards in Geneva at ITU. So domestically, typically you'll have 2 or 3 companies that are competitors, major competitors. They want to win. So they want to cut your throat, you want to cut their throat. You want to get the market first. And you want to get the standard to be reflective of and be part of your product. And what you do there is you have to work with customers to try to get them on your side. You have to work with actually other vendors to try to incorporate some of their things so you get them on your side as well. Because ultimately you have to have some consensus built in order to get the standard done. Then international standards is even more the same. And there you sort of have as you do domestically, but you have a team approach in order to, there's somebody that's sort of the process cop, somebody else that's the main technical person, and so on. And if you're bringing, as we did, bring the U.S. technical standard into the international community, what always happens when you're the new kid on the block and you're bringing something new and somebody else sees it, they kind of go, well, we want to have some input too, and here's what we think. And so you kind of work through that, and eventually you try to get the standard. And if you have enough basis for the work that you've done, then you can basically go and say, do you really want to redo all this? Or would you rather accept it and make some changes around the margins? So the point of that is more that in terms of what's my experience of working with people. So it's not so much as, what technology was I in, but, what did I do? So you'll have to put up with my sense of humor for a second here. So why did I volunteer? I was asking myself that again and again.
Especially every time we canceled the appointments.
It got worse, it got worse. So I knew it was a political meat grinder.
Yep.
So, I started having dreams about the wood chipper in the movie Fargo. Then, one night I woke up and...
Welcome to our job.
One night I woke
Politics.
up in a sweat night, and I realized, oh my gosh, I've had a hit piece written about me in a local paper. So you kind of wonder, so why are you doing this? And then, that joking aside, shortly after I'd hit the submit button, well, shortly, 2 days, 3 days, I got a call from the town manager's office and I was asked, are you still interested? Do you still want to do this? I kind of went, okay. I said yes, and we continued from there. So then furthermore, why do you want to do this? So I'm not a CFO. not a CPA. I haven't volunteered. I've never worked in public government unless you count my time in Sweden. And then, so the last element of why in the world would you want to do this, I was dragging an elephant into the room in that my wife retired as a teaching assistant from Andover. So just to be clear on that, I did check with the town. So I checked with Mr. Murphy, who gave me a couple of forms. One was a conflict of interest form, another one was a 286A Section 19 form. And I called the State Ethics Commission. I said, the pension is no problem. You know, she's got that in the story. The COLA could be an issue, and the appointing authority could determine whether you vote on the COLA or not. I know the retirement board has an attorney. I have views on the COLA I can talk to you about, but anyhow, that was that issue. So I personally consider it a minor elephant, little elephant. It's the
Nonetheless an
elephant in the
elephant,
room.
but yeah, right.
So, you know, you can discuss it when I'm gone. So, why really? Well, I live here. I've lived here for a long time. My family's been happy here. We intend to keep living here. At the same time, I'd like to make clear that we're taxpayers, just like, you are. So, I look at those graphs the same way you do. It is, okay, taxes are going up again. And of course, I'd like the town to be run efficiently, in all aspects. So that certainly is something that came to mind. Then I felt that I had skills that might be a good fit. I'm pretty logical. I'm pretty objective. I'm, fact-based, but not to the exclusion of understanding what things do to people. What the impact is. And it doesn't mean that, you maybe can't do it. I remember the first time I had to lay people off. It was difficult. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that, try to take what consideration you can when you have to do something that's hard. So in terms of why as well, I saw the view graph. So I looked at the late August meeting of the board here, and there was a presentation from two of the retirement board members, and they had a view graph, which I have a copy of here. So the fifth member of the board should be unbiased and independent. I'm going, yep, that's me. Offer options and solutions to bring together different views of the board. Yep, that's me. So bring potential solutions to help address the major financial problems. Bring a new perspective to weigh in on current issues facing the board. So anyhow, maybe I had delusions of grandeur, but anyhow, I kind of went, okay, I can do that. So furthermore, I do feel, based on the evidence that I've seen, that the pension fund is seriously underfunded. I do understand the mechanics of asset allocation, risk-adjusted returns, discount rates, and their impact. And I know that you have others that are probably at least as good as I am at that, and probably a lot better since it's their job. But since I've retired, investment is sort of been my hobby. Golf was a hobby till my back gave out, but investment's been a hobby. I spent a lot of time reading about it, and purely for personal reasons. I want to make sure that my wife and I don't have to eat cat food when we're 90. So, as I said, we did not make it rich through a startup. Then I feel like I can be reasonably balanced because I've seen both sides of the issue. So I've been on the private side, and also my wife's obviously been in the public sector. I personally, so when I joined Bell Labs, I had a defined benefit plan. I've seen the rules for that plan change. I've seen the plan frozen. I've seen new employees not get that plan at all. So I'm aware of how things work in the public sector, and through my wife, I'm aware of some of the things about the town of Andover. And the final thing is, so I watched the OPEB debate, and some of you might remember some of the emails that I sent. And I felt powerless to improve the solution. It's not that we can talk about it if you want, but it's not that the solution wasn't a decent one, but I thought it could be improved. And as much as I like to hide in the bushes, so like I said, I've never volunteered. I've never done this sort of thing. I did ultimately hit the submit button on the application after 3 days on my computer to see if I could help.
No, thank you. So, we'd like to open up to the board. Questions? Bob, would you like to start?
Sure. Mr. Kremer, welcome. I am curious why you had not previously disclosed that your wife actually receives a pension from Andover Retirement System before tonight. You just did disclose that. What you didn't disclose is that I believe you also personally enjoy OPEB benefits because your wife is entitled to cover a spouse. So that's another disclosure you need to
Okay.
just confirm.
Yeah, are you asking a question or?
No, I'm just, yes, I'm actually
Yeah.
confirming. Is that true?
So the first part is not true,
What's that?
that I did disclose. I called the town, I called the representative of the town manager.
Oh, I'm sorry, did the
And
board get
disclose
any
it?
materials? I'm sorry, did the board get any materials? Because all I saw was the application.
Larry instructed him to file disclosure.
Okay, but it didn't get to the board, that's what I'm referring to, just so we're clear. Okay, so the board didn't find out that your wife is a pension recipient until tonight, and I didn't hear you say that you are an OPEB beneficiary, correct? You
I'm
received-
happy to say it. I'm an OPEB beneficiary.
You do, okay, good. Now, this fifth member appointment actually bars members of the pension system.
I understand
being-
that. I'm not a member of the pension system.
I know, but you're a spouse of a member. You don't feel that in spirit that violates
No.
what the intent of the fifth member is?
No, because you don't know me. You don't know how I feel. You don't know what my views are. You don't know how I would vote.
Okay.
You have no clue.
Okay, and you feel you meet the criteria of the fifth member, unbiased and independent?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Or I wouldn't be here.
okay.
I wouldn't put myself through this.
Okay, I asked
Because I
this-
knew you would ask those kinds of questions.
Okay, well, I asked this because I want to point out that the board makeup, as it is, consists of 2 retiree picks, right? The retirees already get to pick 2 of the 5 members. The town accountant is a future retiree who is also part of the system. So there's 3 seats that are controlled by the retirees. The taxpayers through the Board of Selectmen get 1 appointment. So this appointment effectively would be appointing somebody else with a connection to a retiree. That's why I'm making the observation. My next point, I want to just share, my assessment of the retirement board's management performance over the last 15 years and just
Yeah, I
let me get your reaction,
Yep.
okay? Under the current board leadership, there's 3 members that have been there for some time. In the last 15 years, the unfunded liability for the pension system has exploded from 17 million to 161 million. Andover's funding ratio of just 41% is one of the worst in the state. Andover's pension board, in my view, has masked the size of the pension unfunded liability with overly optimistic discount rates, and which are rate of return assumptions. Until last year, the pension board had no investment advisor overseeing 130 million in pension assets. Andover's pension board has repeatedly rejected requests to reform eligibility policies that provide pensions and OPEB benefits to part-time employees. And last year, the retirement board handed Andover taxpayers an unaffordable funding schedule that currently costs taxpayers almost $10 million per year and will increase 10% annually. So I want to get your reaction. Do you essentially agree or disagree with that assessment? And if you disagree, why?
So I agree and disagree in the following way. So I understand that the liability has grown significantly. That's, and that I think is the number one objective for any member of the pension board, is, specifically the 5th member, is to try to bring that unfunded liability down. The last 15 years, so one of the statistics that I've seen is that the return over those 15 years for the fund was 3.4%. Now, I could argue with that a little bit in the following way, in that it's a little bit cherry-picked. So it was from 2001 to today. And 2001 was at the peak of the market before it crashed. That number would be different if it was 2005 to today or 1995 to today. What I will admit, though, is, and what I would like to see, is that number against the benchmark? If it's not close to the benchmark, so what is it that happened? Why is it that low? In fact, my second priority in my personal list in terms of the retirement board is, and I don't know how well this would go over because I watched the July 2016 meeting of the pension board, which was somewhat contentious, to say the least, would be an analysis of, so how did we get here? It was kind of what you said about the drivers. What are the drivers of the overall cost for the town? So what were the drivers? What were the various things that happened that got the liability to grow to this extent? Now, I wouldn't want to do it from the point of view, which is where some of the contention probably comes in, who made what mistake. It's more in terms of, okay, if it was investment, was it poorly invested? Was it, costs? What was it in terms of investment? Did it have anything to do with town contributions? I don't know what it was, but I think it requires an analysis to figure out how we got to here. So I agree with you. The sort of agree and disagree. The 160 million, I presume you're using the 6.25% discount rate. And of course, it's 130-some million with the 7.25.
That's correct.
I think in some sense, it almost doesn't matter which one you look at. It's at least 130 million, which is pretty serious.
But you agree the financial condition of the pension system is in very tough shape?
It is in tough shape.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we going to do this the same, where we kind of do a first
Yeah,
round?
I'd like to go
and
around.
then I'll come back.
Right.
Okay.
We do have, we're supposed to be limited to about 20 minutes, so we're going to try to stay within that if we could. Dan?
I'm quite impressed with your CV and just blown away by your clear intelligence of your achievements in your life. So I just wanted to say that as I was reading your CV, I was quite impressed. You mentioned it. You mentioned your views on COLA. Could you please share your views on COLA?
So when I found out about the COLA, I thought, wow, this is kind of a strange COLA. So it's called a COLA, but it's up to the first 12,000. And then I thought about it some more, and I realized, well, okay, so it's 3% to 12,000. It's 1.5% at 24,000. It's 1% at 36,000. So in some way, it's a progressive COLA, in the sense that progressive taxation means it goes up the more you earn. In this case, you get less the more you earn, but it's effectively it's a progressive COLA. So that was kind of a different way of looking at it. But the other thing was, it's like, where did that come from? I don't know. I haven't been able to find out, and the research I've done, I realized I could have found out and asked more questions, and I certainly would if I were there. But so it just seemed kind of bizarre to me in terms of the kind of COLA it was. Now, the statement was made that it's about 10% of future costs in terms of the pension cost. I guess I'd like to, one, is verify that, and two is, as salaries go up, the COLA's fixed. So unless the COLA rules are changed, it's actually going to go down as a percentage of the overall cost. That doesn't mean it's not an issue, but I'd like to investigate it. And I think you have to be a little careful with it. So an interesting part to me for the town is, and I saw this from OPEB, is the number of retirees that are not on Medicare versus those that are. So there are sort of a lot of early retirements. Those that actually are on Medicare, and if their spouse is also on Medicare, they're more or less on a fixed income, depending upon the circumstance. Everybody's got a different story, right? So some people might be independently wealthy, some people might still be running a business, some people might still be working. But in general, so I think you have to be careful, but I don't know, to what extent you can delineate the COLA that way. You can't interview everybody and have, 1,000 rules. So I'm flexible on the COLA. And furthermore, the appointing board could decide you have too much at stake, you can't vote.
Okay.
But I would, I'd be interested in taking part of the discussion.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Alex?
Sure, thank you very much. Somebody's fellow person that started his career at Bell Labs in Murray
Oh,
Hill.
you did? Okay.
Murray Hill.
So you have a conflict here.
You're a sales guy, he's a sales guy, Jim. You gotta watch out for him.
Engineer, in 1980 at Bell Labs in Murray Hill.
How long?
What's that? I was there, I was kind of subcontracted out by Honeywell, I was there for 4 years.
Oh, okay.
So this goes back, I don't have your CV. PhD in math. So
This is the guys whispering in my ear, telling me that we need to
Anyway,
keep this in time.
Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
Because you've done some digging on this. One of the things that's been a question is this, the discount rate that pension systems have been using across the country. And it was an eye-opener over the last couple of years as far as what's been happening where these 7% discount rates have been assumed and they don't perform. And so it's been something that I know this board has requested. We've got two different discount rates. We've got one that the town manager uses for budgetary purposes, but we've got one for the that the retirement board has used. Any thoughts on that? On the rate of return and the discount rate that's been used, and what you can really get, as a return on your money?
So the discount rate is obviously probably as I think almost everybody has said that I saw interviewed in terms of looking at the tape, is I think the most important part because it determines the town contribution, and ultimately through the actuarial study it determines what the unfunded liability is. I think it's also it's a little bit tricky. So it's since the discount rate is part of an exponential function, right? I mean, it has a tremendous power, and the discount rate can be reset every second year through the actuarial accounting. In terms of the number itself, so whether you go to 7.25, go down to 6.25. The reading I did, so an article that discussed discount rates in general and sort of the mechanics and the politics behind them, basically said, and I agree with this, which is you set it to what you believe the return will be, your best estimate of what the return will be. So obviously if you set it high, then it looks like your liability is less, but you're also getting less funding as a result
So you got
from
to
the
make that up
employer.
somewhere, right?
Yeah. If you set it too low, then your liability looks terrible, maybe artificially terrible, but it could look terrible. But if you set it too low, then you get a lot of funding to the extent that the employer can
Do you think that
fund it.
just from where we are and what you've looked at the history,
Yeah.
do you think it's been set too high? Any judgment on that, or is it?
Yeah, so, the other thing I got was it's a political football. So, I'm dancing a little bit around it, but I'll get to your point. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a political football as a result, right? So obviously there's some incentives in some parts to make it higher because you look better, even though you're not getting as much funding for the fund that you have.
I'd like to see what's realistic rather than.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the right answer is to make it realistic.
All right.
And the only issue around that then is, so I read the paper that Mr. Hartwell and you put together. I read it last night, so some points I had here were actually some of the process that you used in order to determine the rates. The only issue I would have was in terms of horizon. It's difficult enough to do a 10-year horizon, but a pension fund realistically has a 20-year, 30-year horizon. So I think in all the stuff that I've seen, and I went to Research Affiliates today. They have a great interactive site where you can see their estimated returns for emerging markets, emerging market bonds, high yield bonds for U.S. equities, for European equities, and all the returns are pretty muted, and they're valuation based. So 7.25 high, probably.
Okay. Second question I've got, and my last one is, one of the things that the retirement board has the ability to do is change eligibility moving forward. Today, I think it's 20 hours a week, 10 years, you end up with a pension and then full medical benefits. The question is, have you thought about that at all as far as eligibility?
Yeah, I've thought about eligibility and all the other knobs that you can turn. So one of the things I'd like to see another, so I had way too long a list of priorities, but another priority would be, in fact, to run, essentially the actuarial analysis,
But what do you-
turning those knobs.
But on that, just on specifically, do you see any, would you consider any change on eligibility?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends upon how significant the impact is.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I've got.
Thank you. Laura?
I think you've mostly answered my question, but I'll ask it in case you want to add anything. And that is, if you were to be appointed, how do you see your role, your duties and obligations as a member of the retirement board?
Well, so there's a list that I have in this little package here I got from Elena Kaufman, which is to ensure that the current retirees and the participants in the system are served with proper fiduciary care. In terms of what would I do, I think, so I've watched videos of the board. I've been to the last couple of meetings. I can see that there are differences of opinion. So there's no one person that can just magically come in and make everything work and find easy solutions to the issues that are being faced. But I think that with sort of the experience that I have in terms of working with a small team, trying to figure out solutions, so I'm reasonably creative. So I can suggest stuff that might be a little bit off the wall, but I can suggest stuff that might be different from what's been looked at before. So, so like one example would be that I was looking at I was looking at the charts for the various discount rates and the town contributions and doing 10% adders or 7.3 adder. I'd like to see those same tables, and maybe the town would probably cough just as hard. What if you went from 12% down to 7% over time? What difference would that make? Is that feasible? Is that something that the town could stomach in terms of funding? But that would be another thing. Another thing I'd like to see is, to the right on those tables, is as you go down the years, what's the liability that you have at that point? Because realistically, the discussion would be very different if the funding were at 75% than where it is today. So you'd like to see where does it cut over to something more reasonable, where you can have more discussions at that point. And in terms of the more general answer to your question, Mr. Pispelli, again, all these knobs that you can turn is, what impact do they have? How significant are they in terms of the overall liability? There are two things, sorry if I'm carrying on here. There are two things that I think that I would add. So the footnote at the bottom of those tables is an assumption of payroll increasing 3.5% per year. The meeting that I saw from July of 2016, at that point the assumption was 4.5% per year. So I naively kind of equate that with, and Mr. Salafi is going to slap my wrist if I go too far afield.
Yeah, just
I know, is that I kind of equate that with salary increases. And so salary, at some point goes into pensions, right? And how they're calculated and what's set aside and so on. And so I would like to see like a run with a 3% payroll increase to see what that does, for example. And then sort of probably a strange comment is, which would also go into a run eventually, or assumptions eventually, was OPEB was a sort of pension reform in the following sense. So for retirees that are not on Medicare, their payments to health insurance keep increasing till they're at 50% of the town cost. If you're in the private sector, you don't retire before you get Medicare, unless, you have a spouse that can cover you, you're laid off and you have no choice, you're independently wealthy, you got some other way to cover it, because health insurance is going to be very expensive. So I kind of wonder if the OPEB reform won't have an impact on retirement, and that there'll be a decrease, at least, initially it may have some crazy effect, but over time, that it would actually decrease the length of retirements before, and so the length of retirements and also OPEB itself. And that would be an assumption that could somehow be worked into actuarial stuff.
Well, one of the tough things about going last here is that most of the questions, many of the questions that I had on eligibility, discount rate, were you open to change and things like that. But one of the things I really did like, well, first of all, let me thank you very much for even going through the process. And I know it's difficult for you to sit there and know what's ahead of you, because if you were to be appointed, it's going to be it's a controversial subject, so there'll be a lot of pressure from either side. And I love that you said you were reality-based. That's very important to me. Since some of the technical questions have been answered, I'm going to ask you a little bit about how would you envision yourself as someone who could take a fractured board like the retirement board and be a person who could bring them together, try to get them under one roof and look at ideas from every perspective?
So I would do my best to do that. I can't possibly give you a guarantee that would work, but I would do my best to do that.
But the question was really, do you envision yourself as that kind of
As
person?
trying to do that, yeah, because that's the kind of thing we did, for example, in standards. In order to get another vendor to go with us, so they're leaders and they're followers in terms of vendors. In order to get like a follower to go with you and to vote on your side, you kind of give them something. Either they don't care and they're just going to do whatever the standard is, or they have their own little pet peeve because of their customers, which might be in Japan rather than domestically. So you try to incorporate that kind of thing. You have to get creative, or you can't get anywhere.
Right. I mean, that to me is a very important skill for this fifth member, is to try to bring that board a little bit more together. And the other thing since it is such a lightning rod, and there will be passionate presentations on both sides of almost every subject you'll encounter, and I know you've said it, but I'd like you to say it again and really convince us that your impartiality will be without question. I mean, that's something, to me, it's very important that you look at all of the pressure you'll be getting in a very objective way and act in the best interest of the community.
Well, that's basically how I've been. I mean, that's me. I'm pretty stubborn in terms of, somebody's trying to pull the wool over my head, someone's trying to bully me. I basically stick to my guns in terms of trying to get to the right solution. And synthesis is part of that. So working with a group. So I can promise you that. It's just the way I am.
Okay, thank you. So we kind of run out of time for you, but if you have something that's fairly quick, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, the first few questions really related to identifying the fact that we do have a big problem with our pension system, with the unfunded liability, and we've gotten ourselves into a pretty big hole. And what's important to me is the willingness and the ability to make the tough decisions and do reforms. Now, you were quite vocal speaking in opposition to OPEB reform, and I just want to ask my questions in the context of something you wrote. It said, this was right in the middle of the OPEB reform debate, it said, quote, "Instead of picking on low-paid retirees, why don't you address the real problems in the whole picture? The town has always been a weak negotiator of town salary and benefits. Town employees are paid too much, and the pensions are, quote, otherworldly. There are very few private sector companies with defined benefit plans anymore, And those that exist have pensions nowhere near as generous as they are in the town. Now, I've heard other questions here. I've heard you kind of say that you want to see iterations, but there are a few things that I'd like to see your take on. For example, you don't control at the local level, but the state legislature allows a pension after just 10 years of service. In your view, is 10 years of service enough to qualify for a pension?
I quite honestly, from my private sector experience,
I'm sorry?
I quite honestly, from my private sector experience, have a problem with that.
You have a problem with 10 years? I mean, the only one, U.S. military is 20 years, I believe, right? What in your mind, just
I
your
don't
gut
know.
instinct
So let
tell
me
you?
answer what
No,
you
I'd like
read.
to ask you
No,
on the 10
well,
years stuff,
I get,
please.
you asked me a question, I get to talk. So let me answer that. So I wrote that was actually, I wasn't in the middle of it. It was probably the first thing that I wrote.
March 14th.
Yeah, so it was the first thing that I wrote. What's important is not where you start, where I had some misconceptions about how things work. So I didn't know it was a contributory retirement system, first of all. And I didn't know that OPEB was a standalone entity. I looked at the overall budget for Andover, so I had a bad model. Where I wound up with OPEB was that while I thought you could have, in terms of the board, and I know the vote was split, I thought that there could have been some measures that could have ameliorated the solution. So the issues I had where I wound up, so I was kind of actually of two minds when you finish, which is that directionally, Mr. Flanagan came up with a pretty decent second iteration of OPEB. Basically started with, we're going to sock it to the retirees as much as we can. That's my interpretation. And then Mr. Flanagan came up with a solution that, in a more nuanced way, helped solve the OPEB liability, but wasn't as severe. What I was looking for, and I was sort of two minds. I thought that you could have continued to discuss it. At the same time, I understood those that voted for it, because you only get a bite of the apple so often. And you were facing a town meeting, and just be direct. You were trying to beat a possible moratorium. What I was looking for was, it was a major step forward. It was really only 2 or 3 weeks old by the time it got voted on. There was no further discussion. So what could have been done, for example, is for the non-Medicare retirees, offer a cheaper option. If it's expensive, so, don't pay any more than 50% or do the same kind of thing, but offer something where people have a choice. They're younger, they maybe don't need quite as much health care. Maybe somebody's healthy, they don't need quite the same prescription plan. Same thing possibly for the Medicare benefits. So that was kind of an exuberant letter I kind of anticipated in my reading.
But you did speak in opposition to the OPEB reform on the night of the vote, correct?
On the night of the vote, so first of all, I never really spoke in opposition to, I thought it was too severe. I thought that, I'll be direct, I don't have a problem.
Okay.
So I thought that both the OPEB authors and the board was not well informed, let me put it that way, about what it meant to be on a fixed income, nor did anybody seem to understand that somebody who has Medicare pays Medicare as well as the town. And the reason that the town numbers were relatively low is that Medicare really carries the weight of all the medical benefits. And that, in fact, one of the other emails that I sent, and all the later emails were just a bunch of facts. They were tables. And then eventually I figured out, they're not even going to read what I write, so I'm just going to do a little executive summary and send a table. And when it started, there was a plan for non-Medicare retirees that cost those people less than a Medicare retiree that paid Medicare along with their plan. So it was, that kind of stuff never got discussed. It was very frustrating.
Okay. My last question
Yeah.
relates to COLA. You did
Yeah.
mention something about that. One of the recommendations of the OPEB Advisory Committee was actually to limit COLA increases for retirees until the pension system was fully funded. I forget what number recommendation it was. In your response to the board, you wrote that recommendation showed a, quote, meanness in attitude, close quote, and you used the impact on your wife's pension as an example. So my question for you is, do you plan on voting on the COLA if you get clearance from the ethics rules and disclosure? Do you still plan on voting, or do you plan on recusing yourself if you're on the board?
If I get clearance, I'll vote.
So if you get clearance, you will vote on COLAs that will impact your
I
spouse.
tell you what the meanness was
No,
about.
I just heard that.
No, I'll tell you what the meanness was about. I get the response, right? You can't just make assertions. So the meanness was that from the board, or rather from the authors of the OPEB report, there was a statement in the second or third paragraph, which was essentially, we can't have nice things because of retirees. When they talked about the COLA, it was, oh, let's do Social Security, or let's eliminate the COLA. The only reason that Social Security was mentioned was because it had been null for a couple of years. And I asked the question in the very first meeting. I said, okay, so if Social Security is suddenly 5%, will you give them 5%? Nobody said anything. So Social Security is on the whole pension. This is on 12,000. So I thought there was a certain mean-spiritedness to it, because the goal was basically, although there were like, I don't know, what were there, 30 recommendations? There's really only one anybody focused on. Let's sock it to the retirees with 50%. If the law had allowed 100%, I had the feeling it would have gone for 100%. Sorry, I mean, that's the way it was.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Dan, any further?
I'll just say, I have no doubt in my mind that you would promote the positions that you think are appropriate. Paul had asked the question, do you think I think Paul had asked a question about being influenced and whatnot, but, I respect, I very much respect your engagement with Mr. Landry.
Alex? Lauren? As am I, so. I want to, again, thank you very much. I appreciate your candor and your coming before us, and I know it was, I apologize for all of the cancellations and all the things that happened down the road, but we are here now, and again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come in and see us, and for your willingness to volunteer.
Well, thank you. And you can't control the storm, so.
No, I couldn't. I was told I could, but I couldn't. Thanks. Thank you so much. Please, thank you. Thank you, sir. Yep. A quick bio break. I noticed that.
That's right.
Yeah, it's good for you.
Very nice presentation.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
So we're going to break for a couple of minutes while the board, we call it a bio break. You can all use your own interpretation of what that means. Looks like I'm the only one that let go to the bathroom.
I was laughing. Yes, thanks, Kevin. Glad you told me. Come back here where they can't see us. The middle one.
The ice cream one?
Nope, that's the older one.
How are you? How you feeling? We're going in there. Yeah.
I think so.
Gary, come in. Sit down. Make yourself at home. Just sit right here. You can sit here. Yeah. You're more comfortable. Thanks for your patience
Oh, yeah. Thank you
over the
guys.
last weeks and
Thank you
months.
guys.
And
Yeah, I know. I wasn't sure you were gonna
Oh, yeah, we're going to
continue.
We're going to continue.
I'm just gonna give you that in case you might want to read that. This is
Sorry that I started trending. That I started trending.
Well, it didn't go running out. I
I was trying to be just quick and back in.
thought maybe they took the trophy away from your daughter or something. I just, yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So I figure you can hold it if it becomes relevant.
Well, I think
then,
I'll-
you know, if not,
Well, you handed this to me, so it's now in the public record.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I'd like you to, do we have
and
another
I
copy?
gave one to the town manager.
Thrilled about
Okay, so we need to give one to, for the minutes.
Pretty good.
Okay, I have an extra
I'm just
copy.
gonna, yeah, if you could give that to her, yeah. What I'm.
It's
I'll hold
provisional,
this-
so it's-
Yeah, I'll hold it
yeah.
until we make a decision.
How are you?
No, he had submitted this, but he voter registrar.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and if
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
It's after Thanksgiving, you know, so
Hey,
you
I
gotta
put
go with a
the
little
tree up, the
Christmas
lights
cheer.
aren't
I know I
up.
had a physical this morning and that, get on the scale, and went, oh, no. No, that's
Well, I'm
wrong.
trying not to be Scrooge, you know, so
Let me empty my pockets.
I'm gonna embrace the holiday season with a fresh attitude. Yeah, I'm usually a Scrooge, believe it or not, around the holidays. So,
But remember, you do have.
yeah. Well, I played Scrooge in I played, there you go. I played young Scrooge in a college show, so, you know. Yeah. I think I learned it then, I guess. So.
Remember.
Kids are probably say, yeah, you are.
Okay, we're back in session. Welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, again, I would like to thank you for volunteering to, or at least attempting to join this very controversial board. And thank you again for your patience over the last weeks and some of the things we had to endure to try to get you guys in front of us, but I appreciate it. And your patience tonight, since we are, well, you know, we're at 10 o'clock here, so. I'd like to start out with you just kind of giving us a little narrative about why, who you are and why you,
Why I would raise my hand.
why in God's name,
Okay.
why in God's name would you want to do this?
Okay. Well, I'm Gary Coon. I live at 24 Summer Street in Andover, Massachusetts. And
That's a requirement, by the way. So.
I meet the residency requirement.
It's not a requirement, actually, yeah.
Well, I do live in Andover, and I grew up here. In fact, some of the conversation tonight brought back some memories for me. I actually attended West Elementary. So when we're talking about the building, I know it very well. And then actually we moved over to the other side of town. I went to Bancroft, and then up through the schools and up through the high school.
Of all the schools you went to,
And some interesting, architectural issues that I experienced through the years. And then actually while I was attending Andover High School and in the beginning of college, I worked throughout those years at Kohl's Hardware, Kohl's True Value Hardware, if any of you remember that.
Mr. Cole.
And going next door to Ford's Coffee Shop and really experiencing the downtown. So when you talk about the downtown and the issues surrounding walking through downtown, et cetera, that certainly means something to me.
We had 2 hardware stores at that time.
We did. And things have changed through the years. But I came to love the town, and you get, as a young person growing up in Andover, when you work in a job like that, you get to meet a lot of different kinds of people. And you're kind of, when you're in the downtown in particular, you're sort of right in the heart of the town, and you sort of absorb that. And I think that may have been some piece of what maybe drove me some short years later after getting out of college and working actually in the venture capital industry. I decided to run for public office and had the great privilege of serving Andover in the House of Representatives for 3 terms in the early to mid 90s. And so I've tried to be active in different ways in the community, and I think that provides maybe a little bit of context as to why I might consider trying to have a role in assisting the town at this time. It became sort of got onto my radar that there was a challenge filling the 5th seat of the retirement board, and I felt that, you know, if my combination of actually demonstrated leadership and collaboration in trying to help bring positive change to the public sector from the past, and sort of combined with my background in business and dealing with budgets as well as in the investment realm, might be a match for making a difference at this time on the retirement board. I do currently serve on, just as of this year, on the board of registrars here in the town, and I'm also on the board of trustees of Essex Heritage Commission. And if you're not familiar with Essex Heritage, that's the organization that promotes and preserves the cultural, historic, and the natural assets of Essex County. And I'm currently on the board of trustees as well as on the executive committee, and I've enjoyed serving in that role more on a sort of a regional basis. And this would give me a nice opportunity to sort of give back on the local level. So that's sort of what brings me here. I'm a graduate, both undergraduate and MBA at Babson. And as I said, worked in the early part of my career, actually while I was at Babson, as a researcher of the venture capital industry, and then I actually worked in the venture capital industry. So I have a little bit of perspective about private equity and venture capital from that experience. And then obviously I spent about 10 years, close to 10 years in various capacities in the public sector realm in the House of Representatives. I also served at the Registry of Motor Vehicles as the chief of staff at the registry, and I think it's a relevant experience because that was very much, I'm proud of the work that we did, you know, sort of obviously not afraid of challenges and controversial agencies to agree to take on that kind of a role. And I was in charge of our strategic planning process, and we instituted a number of things, which I think I shared with you, implementing a combination of programs, actually changes to the physical plant, so to speak, of the registry, as well as technological changes that I think improved customer service at a challenged agency. And, you know, I like to think that over the years that has continued to improve things at the registry. If you've been recently, hopefully you had a much better experience. And in fact, most people don't even go that often anymore because of the things that you can do online. So, and I've had the great pleasure the last 7 years of serving as the managing director and chief operating officer of Finer Wealth Management. And I worked with my good friend of over 30 years, Mike Finer, who was the founder of the company. Mike is also a graduate of Babson and founded the company back in 1996 to provide integrated investment management services, as well as through another entity that's sort of a sister business, tax planning and tax preparation and financial planning. So I'm certainly very familiar with retirement planning, with investments and investment allocations, and that world, as well as trying to sort of navigate within a public sector arena to hopefully get some folks to to collaborate to come up with solutions to challenges, and so that's what brings me here.
Great. Okay, so I want to open it up to the board, and we're going to kind of ask you a few questions. Bob, you first?
Sure. Ms. Coon, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to, if you've had a chance to take a look at the documents and the valuation reports and whatever other research you've done, I'd like to just get your assessment of what you feel is the current condition, financial condition of Andover's pension system. How would you characterize it?
Well, I think what the approach that I like to take, and I will answer your question, is just to go into this position like I have in the past with an open mind and some humility that I don't have all the answers, first of all, because this is a new, niche in terms of challenges for me to look at. I know that there are people that have been looking at this for years, as well as in some cases decades, in terms of the Andover Retirement Board. I do think I have relevant experience to bring to it, and I look forward to delving in. I think I've shown that in the past where once I get involved with a particular issue or challenge, that I'm very diligent, and I try to sort of collect the data on all sides and then render decisions based on that. So with that said, I did have an opportunity to I guess it was now probably a month and a half ago at this point, but take a look at some of the materials and talk to some folks that have some experience about this topic. And I guess what I would say is I do understand that that there's a need to balance the primary objective of making sure that the current as well as the future retirees have a system that they can plan on, long term, short term as well as long term, with the need to make sure that the system is sound. And I'm kind of having grown up in Andover, I like to believe that I'm a competitive kind of a person, and I believe in best practices. I like to see Andover sort of being at least in the upper quartile, in ways that are measurable. When I see that we're in this area, in this particular arena may not be in the upper quartile in terms of our funding ratio, that's both concerning, not only just from the standpoint of us being sort of competitive peer-wise, peer community-wise, but also having a system that's sustainable for the retirees. So that's, I don't know that I necessarily have all the solutions right now, but...
Well, I didn't ask you for solutions, I just asked you to characterize the system, and your political skills are outstanding, so I guess I should have expected that. But what I was looking for more is a characterization of the fact that we are one of the worst funded pension systems in the state, right? At 41%. We've got a $160 million unfunded liability that's exploded in the last 15 years. So I don't think there's any question that we have got some serious financial issues to challenge. I'm going to leave it at that for the sake of time, and with the understanding we'll come back.
Sure. Yeah, pass for now. Good.
Gary, the two couple of items. Have you looked at the rate of return that we use and this discrepancy that's out there kind of in the marketplace?
I know there's a couple of different
yeah.
ways of looking at the return, and there's a couple of different, assumptions that have been out there in terms of a sort of a more aggressive rate of return, a sort of moderate, and the 6 point something, the 7 point something, et cetera, and obviously that has an impact on the funding ratio rolling forward. So that, again, I like to get more direct feedback from the consultants you know, that have come in, you know, and did that research before having a you know, sort of a complete sense of what maybe is the most realistic. But obviously, I understand that it's a critical issue, you know, as to what the assumption is for the
Right, having the
rate of
assumption high,
return.
yeah.
And I'm also concerned about, you know, you can certainly sort of design an allocation that meets a certain rate of return based on the analysis, but then you also have to weigh that against, is that an acceptable risk to the system and to the, you know, and to the those that would rely on that system. So that's a concern that I have, is to make sure that, you know, rolling forward, that we consider both the risk as well as the you know, realistic nature of the projected returns. And I know there may be certain parameters that, you know, that are on the system, you know, that require the certain either more conservative or you know, protection of those assets so that they're available, et cetera. And I look forward to learning more about what those requirements are, because that obviously also feeds into it.
How about one of the things that the retirement board has somewhat control or decision-making power is the eligibility of benefits. So today, I think we have a 20-hour employee, works for 10 years, qualifies for pension and medical benefits. And I know that's something that, it's 20 hours, but it's up to the retirement board. I don't know if you've ever thought about any kind of eligibility parameters.
I think I'd like to look at what the history of what's sort of been committed on that topic.
This will be looking forward.
Yeah, okay, but in the past,
Yeah.
as well as what kind of a, if that's one aspect of the overall picture, how that puts us in terms of benchmarking us against other communities.
Yep.
And that's what I would factor into deciding that particular, you know, issue.
Okay. All right. That's all I got.
Laura?
If you were to be appointed to a position on the retirement board, what would you see your role being there, and what do you see the role of the retirement board is, or do you understand that role to be?
Well, I understand the role as being someone who is helping to serve to protect and the benefits of the retirees, and current and future retirees is the primary objective. You know, and so that would be the that's my understanding, and so all of these issues, I think, relate to that, but that's the primary goal. I think in my case, I think that what I bring to the table are a couple of things. One is a perspective from the standpoint of having worked the last approximately 7 years in the investment management business, being aware of what's going on in the economy, being aware of what's understanding returns and investment allocations in the different sectors and asset classes, et cetera, because that's something that I view on a daily basis. So the extent that that background could be beneficial, that's what I would bring, one of the things I bring to the table. I think the other thing I bring to the table is actually a demonstrated background in the public sector of working on a bipartisan basis on challenges. I've done that in the past. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is I founded the Merrimack Valley Legislators Caucus on Beacon Hill, and that was that was a bipartisan caucus, and our goal was, and we did it very successfully, was to identify one or two major issues each year that we could agree on a bipartisan basis that affected the Merrimack Valley, and then we would sort of band together and bring that to the rest of our colleagues on Beacon Hill, and we were able to get some accomplishments from that approach, and that's something that I created. And so this is not the legislature, but it's I think a demonstrated past experience of working on a bipartisan basis or multi-philosophy basis to try to come up with solutions that, make a difference. You can't always obviously make everybody happy, and at some point at the end of the day, you got to make a decision that you think is the right thing. But I do think that I do have a history of listening and helping people work together. So I think that collaborative skill set is also hopefully beneficial on a board like this.
Just a question about time, as I have learned on my situation that things often take more time than you anticipate, and
One
given,
meeting every other 2 meetings in a month.
and do you feel that you would have adequate time to attend the meetings or prepare for them and that sort of thing, given that you obviously have a lot of responsibility in your paying job?
Yeah, I think you find a way when you're busy to juggle all the balls. I like the morning meeting aspect, quite frankly. That doesn't relate to the preparation time, but at least the morning meeting structure actually works pretty well for me to sort of meet first thing in the morning, as opposed to, you guys are.
The clock can't be right.
We'll be here tomorrow morning.
All right. So if it's something that to me, I have a very good attendance at like the Essex County trustee meetings, and if I'm going to commit to it, I commit to it, and show up at the meetings and do my due diligence. So, I think I can meet that commitment.
Good question, Laura.
Yeah.
And it is critical because this is, as you know, a somewhat controversial subject matter, and there are very strong opinions on every side of the issue.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns is being strong on your convictions, being able to stand up to any side of an issue, stand up to your own convictions, and making sure that you aren't influenced by or overly influenced. You should be influenced by outside sources, but not overly influenced, so that you're not. Talk a little bit about
It's a balance.
how would because you're going to be strongly lobbied by people on both sides of the issues, all the issues. So how would you react to that?
Well, I think that's just more a sense of your own integrity. I think hopefully that, again, was reflected during my time on Beacon Hill. I think I had a good reputation for being a person of my word, and I don't think you would even enter into that arena if you didn't have a little bit of a thick skin and a sense of humor kind of combined. You need both. And so I think you develop a little bit of that. You do want to listen, but you have a little bit of armor to you as well. And so, I don't mind making decisions. I'm pretty deliberate. I do listen, I do seek information, but then I have no problem making the decision after that. I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Independence and integrity, I think, are going to be very important decisions on who we appoint. And it is, again, you will be lobbied by both sides of every issue, and that's okay. You've got to, you want to learn from all of that, but you need to, I think, stay strong. So.
Thank you.
So we can keep going.
Yeah, as we're sitting here, I'm looking at you, Gary, and I'm thinking, geez, I probably, and Bob helped me remember this. I probably should have disclosed that I think it was, 6 years ago, you wrote a letter in support of me and the townsmen. So, in today's political climate, I want to make sure I disclose that. To make sure that everyone's aware that I think it was 6 years ago you wrote the letter, and I don't think you ever donated to my campaign. So that's okay. So
I'll make a disclosure as well, even though it's not required, that 4 years ago, Gary did, in fact, send me a check for $100 for a campaign that I ran for the state senate. And I did check with ethics today, and it's covered under non-disclosure not required. It's covered under Section 930 EMR 5.10. But in my conversation with ethics today, prospectively,
Wait a minute.
I did, in going through with the ethics person, it was actually very interesting. This is something I didn't pick up on. Gary and I have served on the Republican Town Committee together. So what she recommended is that I file a disclosure with the town clerk, which I did today when I was speaking to her, that we have served on a committee together. So I did disclose that, so.
And as you say that now, I'm sitting back thinking, I
It's
as
covered,
well.
by the way, under
Yeah.
Section 23. The form is, which we had another one filled out recently, 268A, Section 23B3, which is on file with the town clerk. And I did talk with Larry today to ensure that I had the right forms and everything. So that's,
And as you say that, Alex, as well, I'll additionally communicate that for a period of, I don't know, maybe 4 years, I served on the Andover Town Republican Committee as well. Not for the last year or two, and not because I changed my political designation, but just to insulate myself a little bit from bipartisan type decisions or partisan type decisions. So that's my disclosure, and I probably should file
I think
a statement as well. I didn't even think about it until I'm sitting here.
I wouldn't have thought about it until I
No.
talked to ethics today about
Should I
this.
mention my letter as well?
I will say I've known Gary for about 15 years, and I think when you're in a town, you know people like.
While we're at it, I also provided a letter.
Anybody else?
You want me to read it?
It's apparently, well, you can read it, yeah, sure.
Okay, it just.
Do you want to hold that? Or have John hold that?
Could you hold that over there?
That's like me.
Earlier this year, I was appointed to the Board of Selectmen. This is from you. By the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Registrars for the town of Andover, Massachusetts. I am certainly honored to serve our community in this capacity. However, it has come to my attention that should I be appointed to the Andover Retirement Board, the Massachusetts general laws dictate that my appointment to the Board of Registrars will automatically be and immediately be revoked. In the event, it is also determined that a formal letter of resignation is required. Under such a scenario, please accept this letter as notice of my immediate registration from the Board of Registrars of the town of Andover in the event that I am appointed to the Andover Retirement Board. Best regards, signed Gary M. Coon.
So that's efficient.
This is in the record. You have a copy in the record. So
We've got all disclosures out there.
that's right.
I don't know, there might
I'll
be some more.
disclose that I shook his hand
More,
on the sidewalk last week.
But I don't think I've seen or talked to you really in the last year. But I guess my question is, relatively recently, the Board of Selectmen, prior Board of Selectmen and the current makeup, made changes to the retiree health care. And the changes were not a unanimous decision. And I wanted to get your opinion on that whole scenario. And I know it's not directly related to your appointment to the retirement board. It's just I'm kind of curious about how what your opinion is of the changes that were made to retiree health care, OPEB, impacting OPEB, in which over a 4-year period, the Board of Selectmen voted to increase the contribution by the gappers, the people that were 55 to 62, prior to being on Medicare. So
Is
what's
that open for further, is it still an open issue in your mind, or?
No, I'm just kind of curious what your opinion was of the changes that were made. Whether you thought those were appropriate, whether you thought they were too drastic, or just general thoughts on your opinion on that.
I would have to say I don't really have enough information on that issue. I'd be happy to look at it, obviously, but it's not something that I'm prepared to comment on. I'd rather not just put out an opinion out there if I don't have the information. So.
Yeah. No, I respect that. And clearly, that wasn't a staged question. But anyway, Now, the prior candidate had mentioned there'd been some discussion about retiree health care, and in the discussion, the prior candidate had commented about how it was a split decision. And I'm just reflecting back to that meeting. And I do recall in that meeting that it was myself and Selectman Salafia that voted against the changes that were being proposed at the time. And it's funny because no one ever asked me why I voted against it. And I'm just going to kind of take the opportunity to say, at least in my opinion, from when I voted against it, I voted against it because we had the opportunity to work with the employees for a period of time, and I was asking for 2 weeks. And, I was asking for 2 weeks to continue working with the employees to see if we could come up with a compromise. I didn't like the 4-year scale-in. I thought it was a little bit aggressive, but I would share with you right now, I will share with the board, that it's unfortunate that that vote was taken then, because 2 weeks later, I can at least say it would have been potentially a 4-1 or potentially a 5-0, because I think the changes were necessary. I thought they were a little drastic, but the reason I voted against that was
The process.
the process, really, and I really think we missed a huge opportunity to work with our employee groups, AKA unions, to help better mitigate the impact on our retirees. But no one's ever really asked me that question, and and I don't know what Paul's opinion on it was, but we always hear right now, oh, it was a split vote. Well, it was a split vote, in my opinion. It would not have been a split vote if it wasn't, if the process was executed a little differently, more respectfully to the employee base. And it would have given us a heck of a lot more opportunity to work with the employees to achieve the same financial benefits with not impacting the retirees as much. So,
Well, I thought as well that it was a matter of fact, I ditto almost everything you said, and we've talked about it since, but at the time, and I didn't mean to, and it's really almost inappropriate to be saying it here, but since it was open.
Let's say it.
It was open to discussion, and no one's ever asked me either, but it's for the same reasons. I thought it was a great opportunity. The unions were saying to us, we want to talk. And it would have, I envisioned, maybe naively, but I envisioned the possibility of having the present employees, the retirees, and future employees all share in a solution. And in those 2 weeks, and I was absolutely on board with the 2 weeks, that we might have been able to achieve that. And I think we lost an opportunity that night. And that's the only reason I didn't vote against it. I voted for opportunity, a different opportunity, but we didn't get it, so that's fine. So you were here to ask him questions.
yeah, no, and I was just really, I was really just asking the question just to kind of open up the, what's your opinion
Well,
on change?
if it speaks to process, I think that I hear what you're saying about process. And if I don't know if there's still sort of bad feelings that are still
Oh, we don't
out
need to
there
go
with
there.
that.
No, we're going to court over that. We're going to court over that one.
But I think, obviously, I am sensitive to reasonable process, that people should have their say, et cetera. So, I think that's important. Again, the decision may not be something ultimately that folks agree with, but it is important to have your say and to get all the information. So I think that.
Okay, we're approaching time, so we have any more? You have another question?
I do.
As quick as possible, I appreciate it.
Well, we've waited long enough to have this process, so I'd like to finish my questions if I could. My God. Your investment management experience, do you work with public or private pensions? Do you invest assets or manage assets for public or private pensions?
We do not. We have some either foundations or nonprofits, but no government entities that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Okay, so it's all private sector. And one interesting configuration that we have is that the retirement board has the authority over the pension assets. About 130 million, I think, is under management right now. The retirement board has full control over that and how it's invested in the risk. Yet, taxpayers are on the hook for the pensions regardless of performance. So the question for you as a member of the retirement board with investment management experience is, how do you factor in the fact that you're managing assets, you have the authority to manage assets, but you really don't have to live with the consequences because the taxpayers have to fill in any gaps. So my question is, how do you integrate the taxpayers and the taxpayers into that process? Because you don't have to now. The retirement board can basically go to the casino and gamble all the money if they want to. And the taxpayers would be on the hook for whatever losses there are.
Is that possible? Could they go to the casino with $130 million?
I was being figured, I was being literal.
I'll volunteer to do it.
Well, I guess I'd have to understand what's appropriate in terms of, but in terms of getting
I'm talking about the
that
risk
input.
profile. The risk profile of the assets can be very risky. The retirement board can take whatever risk profile they want, because if the investment returns don't manifest themselves, the taxpayers are on the hook to fill in the short. So I guess what is your view of how you would integrate the town's input into that?
Well, I guess that's what I was addressing, is that, unless I'm mistaken, is there not an opportunity for, representatives of the town and/or citizens to come in to the public meetings of the retirement board to give that kind of input?
Only as spectators, not from a vote point of view. So you as a board member would have to decide that.
Okay.
Let me move on here.
Well, it's a public meeting, though. I think what he's getting at is a
Yeah,
public meeting.
no,
People can
clearly,
come
There's
in.
an
anyone-
opportunity
anyone-
potentially to do that.
Right, anyone
like
can
here.
do that.
Yeah.
Right. To the extent you said, this goes to the OPEB question, to the extent, I'm sure you understand that eligibility for OPEB benefits, retiree health insurance benefits, are driven by eligibility for pensions. If you qualify for a pension of any amount, you get OPEB benefits. So the question is, do you feel in setting eligibility on the retirement board, do you feel you have a responsibility for the cost that will result from those as it relates to OPEB? For example, a change in eligibility may not have a big effect on the pension system, but every new retiree gets OPEB benefits, which is outside the system. So my question is, would you have a feel that the retirement board should have a responsibility for OPEB costs when they're setting eligibility goals?
I'm not really prepared to discuss OPEB tonight. I mean, it's just not something that I'm prepared to discuss.
Okay, anything else?
No, but
No? Alex?
Good.
Laura?
I'm good.
Gary, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate your patience all these weeks, and your patience especially tonight. We're at 20 minutes before 11, and again, I appreciate your coming in and certainly your willingness to serve your community.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, so what is our pleasure? I think we
We did two good candidates.
have two great candidates. I think what we need to do is have a...
Choose one.
I don't think that it's probably a good idea at 20 minutes to 11 to have a deliberation on them, or does the board feel any...
I think we should.
We should?
Yeah, I think so.
You want to deliberate and vote?
Yeah.
my
Is that how the-
only thing is I'd just like to file that paperwork before I take a position. I don't know if that's really
It's just a
an issue.
disclosure. It's just a-
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a disclosure, but do you feel that's advisory? Would you advise that I file that disclosure before taking a position on any of these candidates?
I really don't have, I can't advise you right now of that.
Nothing, won't advise you that either. They'll just,
Yeah, no, I mean,
you can do it publicly and then file it,
yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with moving forward with the candidate pool. I just,
Are we okay with, do you want to do it tonight?
I just don't want to be called on, I don't want to be called on, gee, this guy didn't submit a disclosure.
You did publicly disclose.
I did publicly disclose it. I didn't disclose it in the proper paperwork. So I'd prefer if we can just hold off on deliberation to Monday. I'm fine with moving forward on Monday. just to give me the opportunity to file that disclosure and not open myself to any negative commentary.
Does that have any ramifications? Do they have a retirement board meeting coming up, or
No, between now and Monday.
no?
Number 21st.
Okay. All right, Laura, do you have any thoughts on that, or you okay
I'm
with
willing to wait until next week.
Bob, you okay with it?
Well, there's no choice.
Well, you could. I mean, the
You
four of you
can
could
voice your
choose to
opinion.
move forward if you wanted to, or, I'm just asking you to wait the week since there's no pending retirement board meeting, so I can file the proper disclosure form. I think that's kind of a key point that people want to make sure that disclosure forms are filed nowadays, right?
It's all about transparency, Dan.
All right,
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
but please don't speak out.
so, yeah.
All right, so.
Plus, I
then-
kind of want to get to bed soon. So, we've got
can
two
ask
other
for-
items on the agenda as well.
I know that, but it's not if the board was willing to deliberate, I would certainly do it, but.
And I had the forms compiled,
All right, so we, Mr. Town Manager, if you would make sure that's on the agenda for.
First thing.
We'll put it right after the continuation of the classification hearing.
Okay, good.